Hello, welcome back. I'm Richard Two Bears, and this is a medicine journey. Today I'd like to talk to you about the different tribes in Canada and the United States. I'm often quite surprised. People ask me, what native blood do you have? Where are your teachers from? What tribe are you? Questions like that. Well, when I tell them, most people have no idea. They have no concept that there's as many tribes as there are. For example, my born-to people are the Micmac people of the east coast of Canada. My spiritually adopted people, the people that I learned a lot of my spirituality from, are the Sioux people from Washington State, on the Colville Indian Reservation just below the Washington, British Columbia border. How many people have heard of Micmac people? How many people have heard of Sioux? Probably not many. I'm not surprised. Most of what people know about First Nations people in Canada and the United States comes from Hollywood, comes from movies. So people know tribes like the Sioux and the Cheyenne, the Iroquois and the Mohican from the movie of the same name. Some people know about the Hopi people or the Navajo or the fierce Apache people. It's pretty much where it stops. If I asked you, how many tribes, how many different tribes do you think there are? How many tribes in Canada? How many tribes in the United States? How many languages do you think they speak? Well, today, I will answer those questions for you. Because it's important to understand the number of tribes there are and the size of the First Nations people in Canada and the United States, and how much of Canada and the United States they originally inhabited before the arrival of the Europeans. So, we'll start with Canada. In Canada, there are 634 tribes. 634 recognized tribes that speak 50 different languages. Those languages come from 6 different distinct dialects. For example, the Algonquin people, the Micmac people, and the Blackfoot people all speak variations of the Algonquin dialect. So 634 tribes speaking 50 different languages of 6 different dialects. That's pretty phenomenal. Then we cross the border into the United States, where there are 567 federally recognized tribes that speak 296 languages that come from 29 linguistic stocks. Before the arrival of the European, these 567 tribes traveled. They migrated from one place to another, following the herds or moving to better climates. The Apache people, who live in the American Southwest, for example, migrated from northern Canada. Their relatives in northern Canada are the Dene people. They speak the Dene dialect. So Dene people in Canada up around Hay River Northwest Territories in northern Alberta. Hundreds of years ago, some of them migrated south, along with their cousins the Navajo, who settled in the American Southwest. They are of the Dene people. There's many, many more examples of that. The Delaware people, Lenni Lenape in their own language, Lenni Lenape, have a document called the Red Record that records their migration story from the Lake Baikal region of Siberia across the land bridge to Alaska, through Alaska, Yukon Northwest Territories, through the Canadian Prairie Provinces, past the Great Lakes, into upstate New York, to settle on the coast of Delaware, along the Atlantic Ocean. In their record, in the Red Record, they talk about encountering other peoples that live in areas that they still inhabit. Let's go to the Sioux people. Most people have heard about the Sioux people. Most people heard about the Sioux people and the Cheyenne and the Apaches and the Arapaho and the Blackfeet. And some people know about Chief Joseph and his Nez Perce people because Hollywood has portrayed them, and because they were the last tribes to fight wars against the U.S. Army. The Lakota people, got you there, didn't I? The name Sioux comes from the 1700s, from the Cree people. It's actually a shortened Cree word, that word being Natuasu. In the Cree language, that means our enemies are like snakes. So the name of the Sioux people, the people that we call Sioux, come from their enemies. Their name for their own people is Lakota. But, depending where they live in the country, they can be Lakota, Nakota, or Dakota. Lakota with an L, Nakota with a D, and Lakota with an L, Nakota with an N, and Dakota with a D. They live between North and South Dakota, eastward, back to the state of Michigan. There are also some living in Canada that after the massacre at Wounded Knee and the Custer fight, they migrated north to what's called the Grandmother's Land, Canada. It's called Grandmother's Land because it was ruled by the Queen at the time. Those people chose to stay in Canada. So there are small pockets of Sioux people, Lakota people, living in their country, in Canada. Now, that's a broad sense, saying that this person is a Lakota. Because within the Lakota Nation, if I'm correct, there are 7 tribes. One of which being Oglala. Oglala. So a Sioux person might be an Oglala Sioux, an Oglala Lakota, living on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, for example. Another thing, in the United States, where Native people, where First Nations people live, it's called a reservation. In Canada, they're called reserves. In most cases, in a lot of cases, they're accessible to the public during the time of ceremony. In some cases, they're not. In some cases, they're closed to outsiders because of the way people have behaved, because of the negativity brought upon the people. So, I could spend a great deal of time listing off the names of all the tribes. 567 in the United States, that would take a while. 639 in Canada, that would take a while. If you have a strong interest in this, I would suggest that, especially for the American tribes, there's a book called 500 Nations that records the tribes of the United States. In Canada, you would have to access the Canadian government public library, and they might be able to help you find out the different tribes. But I could give you names like Okanagan, Shuswap, Klickitat, Sanpo, Sinixt, Haida, Cree, Piegan, Algonquin, Micmac, Maliseet, Passamaquoddy. Those are just a few tribes that trip off the top of my head. In the United States, Iroquois, Mohawk, Cherokee, Seminole, Alabama, Creek, Sioux, Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Apache, Hopi, Navajo, Coahuila, Mission, Sanpo. Again, 567 different tribes. So like I say, the tribes that are more popularly known are the tribes that fought the last wars in the late 1800s. The last Indian wars were fought in the 1890s. The First World War, the Allies against the Germans, was in 1917. Not very long at all after the last great Indian wars. And it's even, for me, it's wrong to call them Indian wars, because they weren't really Indian wars. In most cases, they were more like slaughters. They were the government policy to rid the land of the First Nations people so that they could claim the land for themselves. You're not using it. You're not plowing it up. You're not planting crops. You hunt animals and grow little gardens. But more importantly, they didn't speak English. They were uneducated in the ways of the European, in the ways of the white man. So they were second class. They were treated as if they were second class. They were discriminated against terribly. They were sent to mission schools. They were beaten for speaking their own language. Their hair was cut short. They were dressed like Europeans. They were made to become Europeans. Let's take the Indian out of them, was the policy of schools like Carlisle and other places. So it's interesting to understand about the many different tribes. My Born-To people, the Micmac, I know a little bit about, not as much as I would like to. I was told by my grandfather that my great-great-grandmother's name was Emily Francis. But it was not popular for my father's generation, or even my grandfather's generation, to acknowledge Indigenous heritage. It became a bit more popular in the 60s with the hippie movement, but even then, it was playing at being Indian. I was living in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, when I was invited to my first sweat lodge that took place in secret, on the Maniwaki Indian Reserve in Maniwaki, Quebec, a few miles north of Ottawa. I say in secret because it was against the law to sing the songs, to practice the ceremonies, unless, of course, you were putting on a sponsored demonstration for the Bureau of Indian and Northern Affairs. It was all right to be an Indian when the government wanted you to. But they didn't want you to speak your language. They didn't want you to learn the songs. So after participating in 50 or 60 sweats, I went back up to see this elder, Willie Commanda. I went back up to see this elder, and I was shocked. He said to me, "Don't come here anymore. I have nothing more for you. And since you're not coming here, there's this gathering you should go to." I was taken aback. I was offended. I didn't understand. Had I done something wrong? It would come to me later. It would come to me later when I met my next teacher. So I went home and I was sulking. I felt really, really hurt. Here I had been learning about the sweat lodge, learning to better myself. And I'm being sent away. Not only am I being sent away, I'm being told where to go when I'm being sent away. I thought, oh, you have a lot of nerve sending me away, and at the same time telling me to go to some specific place. But 2 weeks later, I got in my truck and I drove to this gathering. Standing in the parking lot, which was a big field, standing in the parking lot was a man in cowboy boots, jeans, plaid shirt, and cowboy hat. And he directed me, "Oh, park over here. Park over here," he said. Then he walks up to my truck and he says, "I've been waiting for you. What's taking you so long?" I thought, how could you be waiting for me? How could you be waiting for me? But he was. Because in the sense of medicine, he knew that somebody was coming to learn. He knew that there would soon be another student for him to share his teachings with. His name was Richard Cougar. He became my second teacher. He was a Cree. The first man was an Algonquin. I spent the weekend at the gathering. I spent the weekend with Richard, and I learned a lot of things that weekend about myself. I tried too hard to fit in. I tried too hard to belong. I wanted very much to be a part of all this, but I didn't really know what a part of all this meant. So, as they say, I was getting ahead of the medicine. I don't think I was really trying to out-Indian the Indian at the time, but I was getting ahead of the medicine. I was rushing ahead. So I had to slow down, take my time, be patient. Patience, acceptance, and attendance. I look back on it now, and it was a very exciting time for me because I had another access. I had another teacher. So I went home after the gathering knowing that in a couple of months I would be going to his home and spending time with him for a month. So I went home and I arranged things with work. I arranged to take holidays, all the rest of things like that. All the things that were necessary. I got together a couple of boxes of food, both for myself and to give away. I bought pouches of tobacco to give as a gift because as you will find out later on this medicine journey when we get to the part about gifting, it's important that you give back to the teachers that have given to you. And so I was preparing myself for that. I took my clothes and things like that, and I went to a hippie shop and bought a little packet of sage because that's a plant for smudging, for purifying. And I started burning sage at home, and it smelled funny. It smelled peculiar. I wasn't quite used to having smells like that around me. I'd smelled marijuana and everything before, but sage was a little bit different. And I will talk about sage and other plants in a coming episode when we talk about smudging, which is the act of cleansing and purifying before you do things. So the Friday came, and I woke up that morning, and I was so excited. I was so excited, and I drove about 360 miles to this man's place. And I was expecting teepees and sweat lodges and not houses, not cars and trucks, not people in jeans and cowboy hats and baseball caps and work boots. I was caught by the illusion. I was caught by the Hollywood illusion. Part of me was disappointed that there was no teepees there. But he did live in a beautiful log home. And when I arrived there, I arrived to find 3 friends that I knew quite well, and a man that I was to become a very close brother to. A man that was to make a huge difference in the early part of my life. So here I am on this journey, and I've only just started. It's only been 7, maybe 8 months, and I'm already with my second teacher, my second different tribe, and I'm finding out more. I'm finding out more. So that concludes today. I hope that I've shared some information with you that you find valuable. Like I say, if you have an interest in knowing more about the tribes, I suggest that you head off to your local library or contact the federal government in Canada or the United States, or contact me. You can find me on Facebook. I'm not hard to find. Don't forget, Hollywood has a lot to answer for. Hollywood has misled people for years and years and years about the true First Nations people, about the tribes, about where their names came from. Most of the names of the tribe we know are not the names that they use for themselves. On our next medicine journey, I will introduce you to smudging, the act of purifying yourself and your home before ceremony, before traveling, before doing things, using sage, cedar, sweetgrass, juniper. I hope you've enjoyed this time with me. Until next time, I am Richard Two Bears. Thank you for your time. Be at peace.